All right. Despite the reduced number of participants, let's carry on with our lecture 5, Economic Geography and Sustainability. Thank you, the three of you, to take the time and join this live lecture. Very much appreciated for that. And people still coming in. And thank you also for watching the records later on. I'm aware that the current situation, it still requires a lot of efforts from our side. We may have been called to work more from home and avoid joint meetings, which all impacts our normal day-to-day life. Okay, people are coming in, so everybody's still on time to join. And you have the slides in the Holat platform. We will recap the previous lecture on slow innovation and circular economy. I have shared a number of files with you, publications. I try to restrict myself to 3 important core publications, and I think those 3 or 4, they are really relevant to address some of the issues you raised earlier on the examples of slow innovation, very difficult to grasp in the current research. I'm very much focused on research, and excuse me for doing that, but there's also the component of the practice. Both cases in the examples of slow innovation is very difficult to find those cases. And also incentives towards circular economy, and then everything you are reading, be critical towards it. Bring your background. You may have expertise in other domains, in other geographies, in other topics, not necessarily economic geography, and it's important that you construct and disentangle sustainability based on your background as well. And I know that some of you are already doing that towards the topic of your essay. And if you can then bring some an economic dimension, is always important. This can be done through a comparison, can be done through a framework based on the topics I'm exploring here, or based on other topics in economic geography. All right. 8 participants, excluding myself. And so let's recap here the previous lecture. Before undertaking corporate social responsibility and corporate spatial responsibility and the greenwashing effect, more in relation to the prime one, corporate social responsibility. But before that, we recap here the slow innovation and circular economy in a quite straightforward way, I believe. So we talk about this fast, everything fast, fast innovation, fast development processes, and innovation process being them bias towards the urbanized territories. And only recently, a number of researchers as well as policymakers start exploring the potential of non-urbanized territories to foster innovation, and using this innovation to support their own development, social and economic developments. And the slow innovation process and then the circular economy, uh, they emerge as alternatives to organizing the economic landscape in comparison to more classic development models. So we bring these two topics, slow innovation and circular economy, aligned within what we address as sustainability transitions. And we know that indeed they require incentives, as you asked earlier in the previous lecture. Sorry, they involve incentives, and these incentives, after reading the literature, those articles I shared with you via the online platform, they involve institutional arrangements. Sometimes new institutions, they need to emerge to help operationalize circular economy. Primarily, it involves governance arrangements, funding mechanisms, and of course, risk taking from the side of the entrepreneurs or investors, for example. And this is circular economy, circular business models are certainly interesting topics within economic geography and sustainability. What is important to underline here is what we discuss on a slow innovation that brings together changes in terms of behavior from the production side, the consumption side, ourselves as a consumers as well. So the ideal solution as a principle is to address some of the sustainability challenges, is to accelerate the sustainability challenges, is to counteract the classic economic development models, and to indeed support sustainable development towards the future. And if you look at the literature, the literature I shared last week and the others that you find in your online platform, some of the cases you will not read explicitly the slow innovation process as a kind of framework. You will probably see some of these principles of slow innovation, and it depends very much of who is writing about that specific topic, depends of the background of the researcher. In the one of the articles I bring as an example, you don't see slow innovation concept explored at length, but the principles are there, and this is also interesting for you to disentangle. And then, if you decide to embrace such a topic, then it's up to you to address some sustainability issues through the lens of economic geography, embrace slow innovation, or primarily simply identify the principles of slow innovation. And these principles underline that innovation can also occur in non-urbanized territories. We talked about this at length earlier on. The slow city or innovation processes within cities, being these cities located in cities or small, medium-sized towns, somehow counteract these more mainstream economic geography concepts of the creative city, of the smart city. They are highly urban-based concepts, where they underline that innovation occurs because of the proximity involving different types of stakeholders that are together in this urbanized territory. So the core preoccupation on slow innovation is not to go fast and respond to the market, is more rely on lasting longer knowledge, few interconnections, but fruitful, useful connections that can lead to long-lasting products or the delivery of services as well. So they rely essentially on knowledge. Knowledge is very important within innovation policies, certainly, but also important within slow innovation is the knowledge. And here, slow innovation is about bringing expert knowledge, but also tacit knowledge, the so-called savoir-faire in French, the know how to do, how to deal with certain aspects. And it's about also emphasizing, straightening, exploring in a sustainable way the endogenous factors. Circular economy is somehow a rebranding of what it was the classic organization of the society, an organization based on this harmonization with a natural principles. Is somehow a rebranding of this classic relationship. Is an approach that goes against the linear economy of take, make, and dispose. The ultimate goal is to reutilize, repair, refurbish, and recycle, and reintroducing the product, the good, in the consumption cycle here. The goal is that waste becomes a resource and is used, and one product, one good is used to the maximum length of its lifetime. And it's important to continue researching on a circular economy. The concept is still very controversial, and it's still difficult to grasp the true meaning of the circular economy. And most importantly is to what extent these concepts, both or the slow innovation, the principles behind, and the circular economy can actually counteract these more classic ways of organizing the market and the our economic landscape. And still a lot to do in terms of circular business models. There are some works on that regarding it. Still requires an exploration further on. We talk about that this circular, there are already some circular business models in place, and mainly they touch upon on the facilitating the leasing of products or services, They seek to combine products and services. They also seek about sharing and incentivating the sharing of products or service. And we are more familiar with certainly with the recycling. So with the goal of turning waste into new products. The refurbishing is still requires a lot of developments both in legislation as well as a change in terms of the behavior of the consumers. But that fortunately we have been seeing some business models coming through in terms of refurbishing and repurposing, given other functionality to certain products. All of this is part of the principles of the circular business models. And I pointed out here something that is important. Part of this is done as part of the business model of a private investor. The ideal of the circular economy is being embedded in the business model, but still a way to reach that level is through corporate responsibility. Sometimes companies start to doing this or entering or fulfilling the principles of the circular economy through corporate social/environmental responsibility. They start embracing a more sustainable ways of organizing their businesses, and ultimately this will lead to a circular business model. Some of the corporate responsibility here being the social or environmental or spatial, uh, they can work as somehow as a starting point to circular business models. And you asked me about examples. I have done my best to putting a couple of them. You have interesting articles in your OLAT platform, and also try to bring examples from primary researchers on the subject. And I found this one very interesting by Arno Morrison and Henk Meyer in Switzerland. I'm aware of their work in slow innovation. They even have a research project in this regarding, again covering Switzerland and Slovenia. But here they explore a case of Vierson, if I'm pronouncing correctly, in about 2 hours by train from South Paris. This used to be a location, a small medium-sized town, a location of tractor manufacturing. The brand called it Case, the tractor branding. And then this entered in decay. So they entered a process of deindustrialization. They and then they face a lot of troubles in social terms and employment as well since the 70s. And what the authors call is against all odds. They through different or justify it because of a number of factors. Some of them more social, related with the engagement of the entrepreneurs. Others more institutional, because they rely heavily on the support from the French government. They were able to position themselves as a town now responding to one trend in the market. So they have they a number of entrepreneurs, they start exploring this Ledger company, a frontier blockchain startup that designs, produces, and commercializes hardware wallets for cryptocurrencies. So they somehow went completely against that traditional sector. They break what in economic geography, they break the path. They break the path dependence of being a heavy industrialized small industrial town, and they create a new path. Putting this in economic geography terms, they create a new development path. There is still a lot of room here to criticize. Okay, um, is a kind of activity highly specialized. It probably won't be able to absorb all the labor within this town. It's certainly not. Maybe it can be taken as a starting point for renewed urban renewed dynamics, renewed development dynamics in the urban region. I very much like the article, and I invite you to read it. And part of the example, so this is the I googled the ledger. Now the curious thing is that the headquarters are in Paris, which then made me a bit confused at that point. Maybe they already changed. Publishing these articles takes a lot of time, maybe, or they change the headquarters, or for a question of branding in internationalization, competitive arena. They identify themselves as being located in Paris because for international markets, it's easier to identify the location. Paris or Vierzon is certainly still a very unknown location. So in terms of branding and internationalization of the firm, this is very important. And they take advantage of what is called the window of location opportunities, a concept within economic geography that can lead to the creation of new development paths. And so unlikely or against, again, as the authors say, all odds, they use institutional support, social support from the entrepreneurs to enter this niche market of the cryptocurrencies. So they benefit from resources such as cheap office space and access to broadband in terms of internet, everything supported through public entities. You remember the entrepreneurial state, entrepreneurial region. Sometimes we think that in these neoliberalized economies, the private sector plays a fundamental role. Indeed, they still playing a fundamental role, but most of these successful private actors, including Apple, and Tesla, for example, they receive directly or indirectly support from public entities through funding, through the facilitating of infrastructures, and this can be at some point only improving the telecommunication infrastructure. And they also benefit from agency. Here you can translate agency as the institutional support, governance arrangements, this facility of intercommunication and exchanging knowledge within a smaller community, and serendipity, which is they reach that somehow as a sort of an accident. And the definition of serendipity is commonly used in economic geography to justify path creation, to justify how, for example, old industrial town embrace structural change and enter a new development path. And here, focus on the case study. They underlined public funding, they underlined the institutional support, as I've been sharing with you. They underlined the role of the policymakers in this small town. They work as agents of change. They really wanted to do something in that specific location, so they were engaged in bringing about some specific change. And the entrepreneurs located there or located elsewhere that decided to move there because of the facilities, they take this as a windows of opportunity to boost their idea. These type of examples of slow innovation, again, if you go out there on Google Scholar, for example, and try to combine a number of keywords and explore examples of slow innovation, you might be disappointed. But the principles are still there. You may find them, but putting these case studies against the slow innovation concept, it's still underexplored. And there are other examples which I can also underline as respecting the principles of slow innovation in northern Portugal, for example. Here they rely heavily on intermunicipal cooperation involving different municipalities and involving also the private sectors. So in this specific intermunicipal community in the northern part of Portugal, not far from Aveiro, not far from Porto, more or less located here, the second largest metropolitan area in the country, this can also be classified as an all industrial region or sub-region. Uh, they rely heavily on know-how in the textile sector, and in combination with EU funding and also with the support from research and development unities such as this international Ibero Nanotechnology located more or less around here in the city of Braga, they've been developing nanomaterials and combining what they know. They know how to work textiles with more technically evolved textiles. So you don't find the literature underlining this case as a slow innovation, but I find that the principles are embedded in these examples. Just checking if everything is running smoothly in technical terms. Other examples that they might be surprising to you, as that some of these enterprises in northern Portugal, they benefit largely from the European Union funding in terms of smart specialization and region development funds, and they combine here the tacit and expert knowledge on dealing with traditional sectors, and this involves again the textile, the shoemaking, not only for garment industry but also for the automobile industry. And some of these enterprises, as the one I identify here, ERT, they are able to equip high-end brands in terms of in the automobile sector. They combine tradition with innovation, and they combine their know-how with the goal of feeding the market, feeding niche market with high-end products that last long, and they engage with a high profile customers such as BMW, for example. And these so they use their knowledge in mainly related with the production of garment, of t-shirts, of shirts, of pullovers, and they start focus on the equipping the automobile sector, as well as the train sector, with self-cleaning materials, with thermal management textiles. So they improve the way they position themselves in the market. Some of these companies are rather new, but they result, or the labor force and the entrepreneurs, they have been in the sector for a long time. Another example or another question came from you, was about the incentives toward the circular economy. Very challenging to also to grasp in the literature, and I found some examples. I shared them with you. The one I found more interesting and not so complicated to read is this one, focused on the Dutch textile industry. And here is, I still found very difficult to grasp the incentives to do that. The underlining point of this publication is that they give a number of examples and the aims of these cases. And one, if I would expect to find fewer cases, for example, in the Netherlands, in terms of circular economy, there are a number of cases where they are embracing the principles of the circular economy. Still yet to know if they are truly embracing the circular business models. However, they are entering, or they are supporting some of the territories, some of the geographies hosting these enterprises to enter a new development path. So economic geography, what kind of study we'll do? We will conduct a qualitative or quantitative study involving these case studies. We will then identify, we'll start to identify a starting point for this creation, for this new path creation, and start explaining the processes of why they decided to embrace a circular economy transition, as the authors call, and then we will be able to identify these incentives. And here the incentives which I underlined earlier, and somehow a general remark on the paper, is that the institutional arrangements, or sometimes called agency, the governance arrangements, the founding, and also the risk taking of those leading these cases play the role in supporting this circular economy transition. However, the question here that we economic geographers asked, and eventually you also ask, depending on the content of your essay, is how to truly embrace slow innovation and circular economy when the market still dominates, and the economic development models are very much rely on the principles of the neoliberalism, and we most of the discussions involving the higher income countries, not to call global north, the high income countries still rely very much on economic performance, on productivity, on assessing the GDP, and all these conferences, they very much touch upon the wealth of these countries. And together with these elements I'm pointing out, most of the outputs that are produced or elaborated in line with this idea of territorial competitiveness, internationalization of the market, relies very much on fast principles, on moving fast, on performing well. So then I question myself, the usefulness and the effectiveness of slow innovation concepts of circular economy, degrowth, mission-oriented, we will explore in our final lecture next week. So when we are studying such a case studies within or that embrace the principles of slow innovation, circular economy, we have to keep in mind that they may are embedded in countries that rely heavily on that position in the international competitive arena to keep attracting investments and other funding schemes. And some a summary of these different or alternative approaches to the economic model. There's an interesting here summary in sort of a table that underlines, and I will underline the first and the last column here. If they tell that these authors, if we keep in the scenario of continuing the business as usual, so very much focus on the global GDP growth, still relying very much on the same type of business models, focus on growth and involving mostly the private sector, the ecological burden will increase. So this is somehow my interpretation, and I try to build an economic geography domain with a sustainability. You could then just, for example, if this was in the economic geography lecture, I will probably focus on their contribution to satisfy specific niches of the market. But it's important to underline the sustainable dimension that has been, we heard this earlier on, partly neglected still within economic geography, and the environmental economic geography still taking a while to be positioned as a paradigm within economic geography. And jumping from the business as usual to a management of degrowth, so where the goal is not continue this accelerated growth process, but managing the growth, which some authors also call managing degrowth. That's the scenario where the ecological burden will decrease substantially. This will have some potentially significant innovations in alternative to existing production and consumption. So I will place slow innovation and circular economy as it being capable of satisfying niches of the market. Require certainly innovation and dramatic changes in the way production and consumption is dealt with in the economic geography landscape. Again, many domains could be explored at this point. I said mission-oriented, degrowth, we'll explore them later. And I found that somehow as an intermediate concepts to explore between slow innovation and circular economy are the concepts of corporate social responsibility, maybe more well known to you, and maybe less known to you, the corporate spatial responsibility. And if this last one is less known to you, so I'm also happy that you will take something new from today's lecture. And the best examples to explore corporate social responsibility that it still is embedded in the market or embedded in the organization of the economic landscape for a long time, longer than social innovation, slow innovation and circular economy. One of the best sectors to explore it is in these global supply chains involving, for example, commodity crops, just such as coffee, cocoa, some fruits, avocado, bananas, for example. So, and the point here is that this corporate social responsibility goes along with environmental standards or sustainability standards, and often these sustainability standards they impose to the private sector number of guidelines how some that try to support them on their production process, and how to be fair towards the local communities, how to avoid land degradation, for example, if this involves commodity crops. And these sustainability standards, they are based on two points. Or international agreements, and we have examples from the fair trade, rainforest, UTZ certified, that if you turn the package of your coffee, chocolate, pound of chocolate, you will find these international agreements and others before these international agreements take shape, probably some of the enterprises involved in the global coffee industry, for example, they try to minimize their social and environmental footprint through corporate social responsibility. And one of the examples is the Common Code for the Coffee Community that brings together a number of industries in the coffee sector. So all of these sustainability standards, they are the result of institutional and governance arrangements. They are linked to some specific countries, but they are overall, they are global, global standards, global sustainability standards, and they target the specific sectors. One, the Rainforest Alliance tries to improve the environment and social condition of tropical agriculture in the tropics, more or less between the basin of Congo and Southern Africa, for example, in the case of Africa. The fair trade tries to improve the position of farmers in the trade sectors, tries to secure a minimum wage for the minimum wage, a minimum price for the goods they are contributing to the markets. And then there are a number of others that, if you are then interested, that you can explore. The overall idea of bringing these sustainability standards, that there is no one way to seek these trade-offs within the sustainability. There are different possibilities. We often condemn the industry for not fulfilling, for example, or not helping to operationalize the sustainable development goals, of continuing their emissions of CO2. But then it's important to understand if they are trying to seek some trade-offs. One of that possibilities, for example, fulfilling the guidelines of some of these sustainability standards. They try to compensate, to minimize their social or environmental impact by respecting some of the principles of these sustainability standards. In spite of these sustainability standards, and also enterprises or industry embracing corporate social responsibility throughout the media, even in very recently, we have heard about industry not respecting or not respecting the labor rights in some specific locations. We have the cases involving child labor in West Africa in cocoa farming, or we have these big corporations involved in cocoa production, and still not respecting the equality in the geographies they are extracting their raw materials, their raw resources. So we also have to be critical towards the social component, the social justice, environmental justice. I know that you hear about this in other courses as well. So within economic geography, when we are talking about global supply chains involving different type of products, is important to truly embrace this critical thinking. Is that although there are these environmental standards out there and many others along with these, it's important to understand if companies, if and corporations are truly respecting these principles. And there's an article here, for example, criticizing the brand, the industry Chiquita, and the banana production in Latin America, for example, and how they are negatively impacting the livelihoods of local communities out there. And there's also a domain in terms of environmental justice. Is also important to understand the synergies and the trade-offs of these large corporations, and there are a lot of articles underlining the extent some of these large corporations from US and Europe directly or indirectly contribute to the deforestation in Amazonian area in Brazil, for example, or other parts of the sub-Saharan Africa. They some of them, they contribute directly because they are in charge of the investments that take place for cattle production or logging, or for the logging industry, or indirectly because most of their raw materials requires the clearing of native forest in some specific geographies. There's a lot of literature in this regarding, and if I believe that part of this goes more towards issues of environmental justice, human rights as well, the economic aspect is fundamental because their prime goal is to make profit, and we know that that's the main guiding principle incentivizing them to still to act in the market, is to secure their economic growth. And again, in spite of these sustainability standards, corporate social responsibility, very attractive reports on corporate social/environmental responsibility, we still reading on the news that these large corporations such as Nestle and Unilever, they are not playing their part, and they are still responsible for all environmental degradation, plastic pollution, or not respecting the social rights of their labor force. Unfortunately, there are a number of NGOs bringing these insights to the public, so that a new discourse can emerge and policies can be developed. It still a lot to do in this regarding, and probably even the latest report or guidelines from the COP 26 will not be enough to truly address, to truly counteract climate change and environmental degradation in general. And when it comes to the global supply chains, there are, along with those environmental standards, sustainability standards, more related with economic geography concepts. There are alternatives to the classic economic development models. So instead, some of the literature, and not only academic literature, but also coming from the policy sector, they underline that a way to minimize the environmental footprint of these large corporations that rely heavily on global supply chains, like most of them located in highly developed societies in North America or Europe, that require raw materials and raw resources from the south, from Latin America or sub-Saharan Africa, is to regionalize the supply chain, so to rely more on local resources instead of having this production localized elsewhere in the world, is to bring the production closer to the consumers to minimize the impacts, the environmental impacts. This is certainly easier to say, it's difficult to operationalize in practice, as you may understand, requires a number of governance arrangements. The policy sector, governments, they can do their part by imposing, for example, by developing this uh, global supply chain legislation, as in Germany. They can do this, but what how this unfold at the ground will very much depend of the will and desires of the private sector. So there are a number of ways and concepts, not only the slow innovation, the circular economy, the degrowth, the mission-oriented policies, in trying to minimize the environmental footprint and social footprint of larger corporations. Um, I would like to open the debate here at this stage. See if you have some questions. Now that we have some minutes before the break, and then we'll continue with the corporate social and spatial responsibility. Any question involving slow innovation, circular economy, alternative ways of organizing the economic landscape that counteract the neoliberal market? Some opinion you like to share? All right. So if not,
Oh,
yep.
I just had a quick
Please,
question,
gentlemen.
and I think it was from the Hamilton paper that you posted, but I'm not sure. That was mentioning that that companies tend to prefer to set their own initiatives, like the coffee regulation, or these kinds of corporate organized standards. Uh, Instead of having governments do that, that they strongly prefer to regulate themselves, or to come up with these things themselves, rather than have governments get involved. And I couldn't find where I read that again, right offhand, because I wanted to make sure I remembered it correctly. But it sounded like it was a fair generalization, and I just sort of wondered if that's sort of universal, or Are there examples of I don't know, of government regulations really uh, really clicking well, or maybe even coming out of a regulation that was initiated by corporate entities in the first place. How's this interaction? Is it always a fight, or do they kind of
Mhm,
borrow
mhm.
ideas from each other? It seems like
Yes,
it's hard.
that.
Yeah.
I think I understand the core of your question, that is relevant to see, um, mhm, to see who plays the stronger card in this aspect, if the private sector or if the public one, and the extent they combine they combine synergies to an ultimate goal. For example, counteracting deforestation. And example here is the uh, multi is not multi-scale governance. Multi the there are a concept there is a concept within environmental science, not economic geography, of jurisdictional approach. I can share one article. Um, jurisdictional approach. I have one article in mind that I can share, that is similar to the multi-level governance that we often talk in economic geography and territorial development, territorial planning or spatial planning, depends of the country you are based. And the idea of this jurisdictional approach is breaking together the public and the private sector, but it is unclear to me, based on what I have read so far, who plays the key card, if the enterprises with their own strategies to minimize their environmental footprint, or if the governments, within this perspective of their jurisdictional approach, there is a combination, there is a cooperation between the public and the private sector. For example, in the counteracting deforestation, involving the expansion of a field for soya production in Brazil, for example, and this is quite popular there. Now, other thing that came to my mind is the soya moratorium, if I'm pronouncing the word in English correctly, moratorium. It combines also the the role of the private sector with the public sector, but I'm not capable of responding who plays here the prime card, if the corporate sector or the public sector. Based on recent research, there is a tendency or a common, a generalized behavior of seeking more this jurisdictional approach, this combination of the interest of the public and the private sector. It still, when it comes to discussions of cattle production in Brazil, in Amazonian Brazil, or soya production, not to feed the soya markets in Europe, but actually to feed the cattle production in the US and also parts of Europe. The legislation ongoing there, and is mainly based on moratorium, is the result of the alliances between the public and the private sector. I also share on the OLAT platform this European Union guideline, underlining that after 2023, if I'm right, uh, only products that are deforestation free will be able to enter the market. This is certainly a huge step, but based on my previous research in this field, I will say that probably the large corporations, they will find a way to bring their products to the market by eventually developing other type of sustainability standards to accumulate or respect this European Union legislation. At the outset, sounds a very promising legislation, only allowing products that are deforestation free to enter the European Union markets. But how they will operationalize this is very complicated, because some of my colleagues, they've been doing research on the cattle production in um, in Brazil, and this involves very micro scale investors that they receive subsidies from large corporations. So it's very difficult, and then it's very time consuming to truly trace, that's the right word to use, to trace if a cattle, a simple cow, or is responsible for deforestation, and where it is responsible for deforestation. It's very difficult to keep tracking. So we may have this very elaborated sustainability standards led by our corporations because it's nice for them and aligns with the principles of corporate social responsibility, and their shareholders ask for such a kind of standards, it's very difficult to personalize this in practice. I think then we can do a break now. This is a very interesting talk. We can all do a break, and we'll see each other in about 8 minutes. All right. Jeremiah, are you still there?
Yep.
Does this somehow help your question?
Yeah, definitely. I was because I'm really thinking a lot about how this is changing or how this must change because with the talks at like COP26 and these other things, I think people are kind of realizing that whatever regulatory structure we currently have is just it's just insufficient and so I I I can see a shift happening, but I just wonder sort of in which direction it goes. Who takes the lead? And of course, that's going to be different depending on where you look and that kind of thing. But it, fueled a bit by maybe some extra desperation. Maybe it provides some energy from both sides in the private and the public sectors to come up with better strategies or let's say like quicker, more accelerated innovations. It's like or regulatory innovations anyway. So.
Yeah, when the sector I'm more familiar with, that's the one I tend to always give example, is the agriculture one, because before Kiel, I was working at the University of Leuven in Belgium, and specifically focused in Mozambique. And Mozambique is called or can be called a land use frontier or agriculture frontier. So the territory has been used by large corporations for large-scale agricultural investments. And I focus on the planning aspects, on how to plan such a territory to accumulate large corporations, large-scale investments, and the sustainability of local communities, so social sustainability. But some of my colleagues, they focus in the different domain in Amazonian Brazil, mainly involving cattle and soya, and they always talk about this soya moratorium. And I know a number of researchers in this regarding that if it is a sector of your interest, I can share these names with you. And they underline this jurisdictional approach as a new somehow a new approach to bringing together public and private actors. Once in a debate in one of these meetings, I mentioned that this jurisdictional approach sounds too much multi-level, multi-scale governance, but they comment that there are some nuances within the jurisdictional approach that can make it a bit more effective than simple governance arrangements that sometimes is difficult to implement in practice. Yeah, and
Yeah,
one
sure.
of I can share on the chat here, and the conversation is ongoing. This is one of the researchers, and this another one. And I know that they write about these moratoriums in the soya sector in Brazil.
Yeah,
Of course,
I
these are
just
their.
found an article about it. It
Mhm.
seems really
the
interesting because of how big that scale is that it's been implemented. Um,
There is a
Good.
page that is useful for everybody, and I will try to find it here, I think. Okay, here, world, I think it's this one. I recognized it. Yeah, sustainability commitments in palm oil and supply chains. So for here is a link for everybody. Here in the lecture is the call it World Research Institute. They offer you a lot of data and nice, simple written articles on of these sustainability issues, mainly environmental issues, and involving these global supply chains of commodity crops, uh, and in others, you can find a lot of interesting ideas there. And they also write about the jurisdictional approach, which now is an article here. Okay, I don't know if you have access to this article. Let me see if I have access. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting domain, and I just wanted to find a quick way of it. Okay, I'm reading here an article on the jurisdictional approach. Yeah, I wanted to find a quick definition.
Yeah, that last link did work well. It's
Didn't
directly
work.
to the yeah. I was able to download it. Yeah, it
Yeah,
looks like the World
another sec.
Resources Institute is like a really good place to look at, maybe for getting ideas for the essay or just kind of
Yes,
thinking
yes,
about,
is
because
indeed.
yeah, because
And
it seems like they talk about the indicators they use
mm,
and their approach there, and I think maybe that's, I don't know, just from a lot of these papers, it seems like, you know, the indicators is sort of at the crux, at the heart of how to talk about the world in the framework of economic geography. Is like, what do you how do you choose to measure these somewhat abstract concepts, and I think it seems like there's a lot of discussion in some of these papers about, okay, how do we choose the indicators? What are their limitations and that kind of thing.
now I'm finding, yeah, that's the measuring is always mm, trace, trace, commodity. No, I think, okay, that's the one. And they are reliable. This World Resource Institute, so has been recommended to me by my former supervisor. So, and Eric Lambani works in Belgium and the US. In Stanford is probably one of the best resources in the global supply chains and impacts. And other that offers you indicators indicators of is this institution Trace in Sweden. I think they are based in Stockholm, and they trace supply chains. So they have now a study which is very interesting, and one of my former colleagues was involved with. They are able to tell if the beef package you are buying here in a supermarket in Europe, I don't want to mention a branch, it's a supermarket in Europe, if from where it comes from. If we scan the QR code, they are still developing this. If the consumer scans the QR code or the barcode of this beef package, will tell you from where it's coming from, and if is the result of I will say an organic biological production, or if it indeed impacted deforestation in one specific geography or territory. So these traits, they are bringing a large sets of data together to try to help the consumer to make smarter choices. And it's also a very interesting work. And when I heard their talk, I couldn't really grasp everything. It's sometimes very specific, but their goal is to trace supply chains, and which is very curious. It's very economic, geographic / sustainability as well. So I'm really curious to see to the extent they can scale this app that will allow the consumer to trace back the genesis or the origins of the product we are buying at the supermarket. Okay, I think we can. I let the recording moving. So okay, so let's continue to the last part of our our lecture on the corporate social slash spatial responsibility. Share the screen here. And okay. Also, thank you so much for your interactions. They are always very useful, and I'm really happy to then share my knowledge in this regarding, and then later on share the publications. That's the best way I can help you within the essay, but I don't want to stick too much to the essay. Most important is that you take something out of this lecture beyond the essay for your forthcoming challenges, professional activities, academic activities, whatever, as a citizen in your engagements. So I share with you a number of principles: slow innovation, circular economy, a number of examples, mostly in this less developed in small and medium-sized towns. Most of them, they are old industrial areas that try to enter a new development path. There are the environmental standards developed by a number of corporations in combination with NGOs. And two other important domains within economic geography are corporate social responsibility and corporate spatial responsibility. And the way we understand that is the combination of different elements. It involves profit making, but also involves doing business in a more responsible in a more responsible manner. It involves sometimes the citizens, it involves the environment, it involves only social components, sometimes only ecological components. So it involves a number of issues. And there is, of course, a critical side on this corporate social responsibility, which I will underline, and often attracts attention from the students. So as a take-home message from this corporate responsibility, a key debate in the corporate social responsibility is the tension between the global pressures and local resources. So there's the idea of the corporate social responsibility start to emerge when the activities of the industry start impacting social and environmental local conditions or local realities. So this enterprise started to develop with strategies implementing in projects to minimize that impact. For us geographers, economic geographers and regional geographies studying corporate social responsibility, is important that we understand, we pay attention to the local specificities, to the local research. I've been underlying this quite intensively throughout, and understanding the extent some economic activities pressure these local realities, but also when it comes now to discuss sustainability transitions, understanding the potential of these local realities in responding to more globalized issues in the sustainability sense. Um, so, and I while preparing the lecture, then I decided to somehow make a division between a geographical and a non-geographical approach. So the geographical approach with incorporated responsibilities, understanding the impact, the unevenness of development within local communities, understanding the role of industries in the social and environmental development of local communities. Within corporate responsibility, we can make a division between the less geographical or non-geographical, better less geographical, the social part, and the more geographical one, the spatial one. And maybe this is somehow a novelty to you. So the corporate social responsibility involves essentially a change in terms of the business model of the company, of the firm, of the enterprise. It involves a greater integration of responsibility towards the workers, the labor force, the consumers, or the communities where they are working on, or the natural environments. Sometimes it only involves, only takes shape by complying with legislation in terms of labor, in terms of respecting codes of conduct, in terms of respecting environmental standards, as that's why I mentioned them before. Sometimes companies tell, okay, we are doing our part in terms of corporate social responsibility because we have the UTZ certification, so means we are here complying with a number of guidelines. The problem is that sometimes these guidelines are not that strong to really make them change their attitudes and minimize their environmental and social impact. Um, So involves essentially the corporate social responsibility involves the will, the capacity of the private sector to engage with activities that benefit the local community, the natural environment, or the workforce. The corporate social spatial responsibility is slightly different. It doesn't require it does not involve only one industry. A corporate spatial or regional responsibility ultimately should involve various enterprises located in one specific region. The example will certainly help you in this regarding. And they involve in the development of the community. And the ultimate goal of the corporate spatial responsibility is that these enterprises directly or indirectly support the development, ideally sustainable, of the local communities where they are located. Okay, I think the examples that you will come next will certainly emphasize this. So a corporate spatial responsibility does not require a change in the business model or the elaboration of activities to operationalize the corporate social responsibility. It involves more a voluntary commitment from various enterprises in informal or formal manner to commit themselves to improve the geography, I will call geography, of the surrounding area of their enterprises. This will certainly will be more specific later on. So I focus here more on the non-geographical approach, the business approach, the corporate social responsibility. Sometimes this corporate social responsibility is also defined as corporate citizenship when it's targeting the citizens. Simply corporate responsibility. Now I will say, please do not use much this because we have now the social and the spatial and the regional responsibility, and you will find literature specific on these types of corporate responsibility or doing responsible business. And the advantage of this corporate social responsibility is towards the human resources. So the idea, the ultimate idea is to improve the well-being of the employees. In other contexts is to embrace a more ethical approach, which benefits the reputation of the brand. And most of the companies, they do that precisely because of the reputation. And you can question the ultimate goal of their actions, if it's really truly to address a social or an environmental domain, or if it's only because of reputation and eventually satisfy their shareholders. Very contested, of course. And the other component is the greenwashing effect. This is certainly a key point on the analysis of both corporate social responsibility or corporate spatial responsibility. Although in the later one, spatial responsibility, assessing the effectiveness or assessing the greenwashing effect is slightly more complicated than a corporate one. Examples: we have the JP Morgan. They is based on their sources I identified here. They embrace corporate social responsibility, but more focus on the community. So the idea is that that we improve individual lives within the communities where they are located. They have a very nice, very attractive corporate social responsibility report. They are often very visually attractive. Now we can question is the effectiveness of such reports, if they are supported through specific actions or not, if they are really bringing some kind of change. I'm quoting their words, the idea that the prime goal is to create this a lasting impact in our community, so giving back to the community. Coca-Cola corporate responsibility, or addressed here as sustainable business, is essentially focused on the environmental aspects. So they want to reduce the overall carbon footprint. They want to reduce the impact of their packaging. They want to reduce the water consumption in their production chain. They want to improve they want to improve. They want to help the consumers to make smarter choices in terms of beverage. So that's how they position themselves within the corporate social responsibility. So this is only to give you a number of examples. There are others that you can find throughout the internet. Home Depot, less known here in Europe, more common in North America. They have a more customer-focused corporate social responsibility approach. They well, along with the intention of reducing the use of plastic within their business, they tend to do a business that can help their own consumers, so through the products they sell, but also with engagement with the local community. So all of these corporate social responsibilities is also a way to position themselves, and then you start associating, okay, maybe, and then some of them, they use this to also to help their branding communication, and they often use these impact indicators to help their marketing strategy. Here, an American pharmaceutical company, the Bristol Myers, they have what we can call as a socially focused corporate social responsibility approach. They are essentially centered on improving the quality of life of the markets where they are operating or from where they need resources. They first want to seek a work-life balance and equitable, respecting their employees. Um, they want to promote the consciousness of the citizenship, and then they improve the health and promote sustainability of the communities where they are engaged. And I keep underlining the element of the greenwashing, essential when it comes to environmental aspects, but you can also then talk about the greenwashing when it comes to social components. So again, very attractive reports, and ourselves as researchers, as geographers, or or having a different type of background, we always need to embrace a more critical thinking to understand if what they are promising or what they promise to do is realistic, or if it falls down in this trap of the greenwashing effect. If you want to read more, there are a number of references here. And allow me to quote: a growing number of consumers say that they are willing to pay more for products with a sustainability message. But when something sounds better for the environment than what it is, it's called the greenwashing. And this happens, unfortunately, very frequently across our economic landscape. Put it in this way. So the greenwashing is about this disseminating a false or incomplete information. It's also about communicating that, yeah, we are doing something that benefits the local communities, that contracts environmental degradation, and this can be about land or waste, land or water, for example. But then in the end, in the end, what they do is completely opposite of what they promise in those corporate social responsibility reports. And corporations, sometimes they unethically trick us into thinking their products are environmental friendly. But in the end, nothing, they are nothing of the sort. They are not environmental friendly. They do not, they are produced in the same classic manner as before. There are no such a thing as less plastic or reducing the CO2. So it's important to not to confuse greenwashing with green marketing. So these are two different aspects. The green marketing is embraced another other kind of domains, and is a branch within corporate marketing. The greenwashing is precisely about giving a false impression or promising something and not being able to fulfill it at the end. This is often very interesting to explore, and again, a number of examples. Based on the sources, I also like to underline that I'm not making up anything here. I did some research in the preparation of this, and I try to bring nice examples, but there are many others, and you can explore this in the essay if the topic is related. We have some of the main brands in the automobile sector in Europe and elsewhere in the world: Volkswagen, BMW, with their communication, with their marketing strategies in communicating that their cars run on clean diesel, and a number of studies and mostly NGOs come to say there is no such a thing as clean diesel. All the diesel is highly pollutant, and clearly calling it that this specific vehicle runs on clean diesel is a greenwashing. They are just transmitting a false statement. Also in the completely different sector, the Warren Foods telling that they are embracing, they are trying to minimize their carbon footprint, and they tell if you buy our products, you are helping us to reduce the carbon footprint. But the number of studies underline that they still using a partly non-recyclable packaging. So telling us that if you buy our products, you are helping to reduce our carbon footprint, is transmitting a false message. So is doing greenwashing. The same goes for Nestle. Then okay, there's some important to understand. This is always occur in a very fast pace. You know, the environmental standards, the kind of agreements between companies and governments, legislation, they come into force very quickly. So I'm referring here to some specific data. Maybe now Nestle embraces indeed a more sustainable approach to in their supply chains. Still, they use it to communicate that they are that cocoa comes from sustainable sources, but a number of studies underline that no, they are still practicing, they are still engaging with child labor, they are still clearing, they are still not respecting the local communities, they are not providing a fair pay to the local farmers. So there is one side, the side of the company, communicating that we are sustainable, our cocoa comes from sustainable sources, and a number of studies, fortunately sometimes from journalists, from academics, underline that no, if we study in depth their sources, we still identify spots or pockets of child labor, for example, that are used to feed the supply chain of cocoa, which ultimately will end up being a product of Nestle. Other examples, Ryanair, that has been singled out by doing greenwash. They position themselves as being the UK lowest emission airline, and then a number of studies came in to counteract this statement, and also again involving the automobile sector, and the number of studies going against the claims from BMW that one of the electric cars is their electric cars are zero emissions, but they also offer to the consumer a hybrid option, electric and diesel, and then communicating that their electric automobile is zero emissions, that transmits or communicates a false statement, because part of them they use diesel, and means they are contributing to CO2 emissions. Okay, this some of the examples. There are many others across the world that you can explore, and this greenwashing effect often brings a lot of curious elements to an analysis involving economic geography and sustainability. Now I enter the part I call more a geographical approach to this corporate spatial responsibility. But before doing that, I ask if you have some question at this moment. We still have here some time, and I think we will manage the lecture until the end. Some question on the corporate social responsibility. Maybe most of you are familiar with it, and also with the greenwashing effect. Okay, so I will carry on with the corporate spatial and regional responsibility. Is I will say is still a new topic, very much under research. There are a number of publications from some years ago that underline the principles of what is now defined in corporate spatial responsibility, and has been explored more intensively in Germany and less in other geographies. And the key consideration that this spatial or regional responsibility means that the utilization of the region's resources and an advocacy in favor of the local interests. So enterprises, they try to use local resources, and they play a role as being on the side of the local communities where they are involved with. And I think the corporate spatial responsibility plays well here with the concepts we have been exploring, and will explore later on, the mission-oriented innovation policies in our final lecture. Um, It deals well with slow innovation, with circular economy, and it can also support this transition towards a more sustainable development paths. And some take-home definitions here on the corporate spatial responsibility, although the examples later on are certainly a bit more relevant. Some authors tell or address define corporate spatial responsibility as being as in terms of the firm's active participation in regional strategy processes and local and regional economic development. And this is the essence of corporate spatial responsibilities, when a number of industries, of firms, enterprises engage actively in the preparation of a strategy, of a regional development strategy. And sometimes they involve themselves in the negotiation of strategic spatial plans, for example. Others, they involve more in general, in the generalized definition of the regional development strategy for the geography they are located. And again, this implies dealing in a sustainable manner with the local resources, and means also not neglecting local communities, because they play a role within the principle of corporate spatial responsibility. Local communities play a fundamental role in the success and in the positionality of the private sector, of the firms that are there, that are located there. So they use this as part of their competitive advantage. So not only the strength of their brand, or the quality of their products, being in an automobile sector or in other sector, um, instead of using these elements as part of their competitive advantage, they also use their engagements within the society they are involved in different terms as part of their competitive advantage. And I see this is somehow in a positive way, when the companies truly embrace the local realities, or companies that understand that their success, their economic success, also depends on the satisfaction of the communities they are involved in, on the quality of life of their workforce, but also how the surrounding area is well planned and offers good conditions to their employees, eventually helping them to attract workforce from elsewhere. So when the company engages in this development process and putting this in practice, sometimes this involvement, again, as I said in the beginning, is about improving recreational areas, because the company understands that offering to their workforce attractive green infrastructures or recreational spaces is fundamental to attract workforce. This is essential when these companies are relying heavily on highly qualified workforce. So for these companies to be able to attract highly qualified workforce in different domains, they need to offer indeed a good employment package, salary, holidays, other type of conditions, social security, etc. So very much related with the labor context or employment, but also they are the most of these companies in the primarily in in advanced societies, in high-income countries, they are also concerned with the surrounding, in offering good conditions to their employees. And so they engage with sometimes aspects of landscape conservation, improving the amenities, improving infrastructure, improving transportation, improving the supporting even the development of commuting trains, for example, because they know that facilitating the transportation is essential to attract workforce to their surrounding area. What I underline here, doing corporate spatial responsibility is slightly different than having this neoliberalization of the spatial planning systems. Is not about that. Is not leading the private sector taking a hand on the physical planning of our urban regions. Okay, is more about that engagement with the governments, with local authorities in preparing these strategies. Okay, is not having them dominating completely the development, but having a say on that development. And this only happens because of they voluntarily themselves to involve. It's about a self-commitment from the corporate to address some specific societal challenges, and these are very varied. and across a number of domains. Here, I try to put the things differently and relying less on the social responsibility as underlying very much. Core elements. This involves the integration of responsibility in the business model. Some of them, they do that really by incorporating so all their actions are part of the business model. Some of the companies, they simply produce corporate social responsibility reports and identify only a number of activities that help to operationalize that. The special responsibility, and then we have the greenwashing effect that is important to take into account when analyzing corporate social responsibility. The spatial responsibility is about voluntary commitments again, is about supporting the development of policies and strategies in different domains that are useful for the region or for the local communities these firms are involves very much about is involves placemaking, micro interventions in the urban realm, uh, again recreational spaces. It can also involve offering social housing, for example, and then but again, this to take shape requires the strong commitment from a number of enterprises in supporting these regional development strategies of allocation. Examples here, two examples from Germany, because that amongst the research within corporate social responsibility, most of the examples are focused in Germany and in Nordic countries. We have the case of the initiative the Ruhr in Germany, and the road is this initiative has been in place already for quite a long time, and it involves more than 67 organizations from the private sector. So when I underline that corporate spatial responsibility takes shape not by the hands of one corporation, but by the hands of various corporations, here you have an example of a voluntary commitment of a large number of corporations that they are actively engaged in improving the offerings, the spatial qualities, for those that are more familiar with spatial planning concepts, in improving the spatial quality of the rural area. And this involves some of the most dynamic urban regions in Germany and very populous cities such as Dortmund, Hessen, and Duisburg. And in this context, they involve it actively within the planification of the region in improving the qualities of the tangible and intangible amenities of the region. But they also involved in developing innovation programs, in offering recreational activities. I'm not. The idea is that by engaging in this corporate spatial responsibility, I'm not neglecting here their role in corporate social responsibility. Probably, most likely, most of the 67 organizations, eventually more at current today, they also have their corporate social responsibility, which they carry on in different ways towards the social, towards the communities, towards the environment. But then they also commit themselves to support the development of the region and offering better infrastructures to their workforce and to the citizens of this region. Another example is the Frankfurt Rhein-Main initiative. Here also can also be defined in terms of corporate spatial responsibility and essentially focus on attracting investment and workforce, plus valuing the local resources. So their commitment, they're coming together to support the development of the region is with a prime goal of continuing attracting investment and workforce to the region, as I've been underlying before. An important element is that in these both cases, the goal of also boosting a regional identity is also part of the principles of this coming together of these enterprises in supporting the development of these regions. Again, corporate spatial responsibility about a voluntary commitment of different firms located in a specific geography, often a region, with ultimate goal of supporting their development strategies. They do this often to attract investment, improve the spatial qualities, and attract workforce. And this commitment overall helps the region to improve their competitive position. It also helps the enterprises engaged in this informal organization, although some of them they are more or less formal constituted, as the one in the Ruhr here with the initiative the Ruhr. But this coming together also helps the enterprises to boost their competitive advantage in the international competitive arena. And in the OLAT platform, you have publications in German, with case studies in Germany, sorry about that, and also publications in English, underlining the essential principles of the corporate spatial responsibility. And here, before I open the debate, I have a number of slides later if we have the time. A number of questions that often are often developed within corporate social and spatial responsibility is about understanding the role of these individualistic corporate social responsibility actions in the context of globalized supply chains, and to what extent the action of a firm in terms of environmental responsibility can truly address environmental issues at the global scale. So a number of here a summary of the possible questions in this regarding. And we have now about well, in practice about 5 minutes, but my watch sheet tells me 10 minutes. Would you like to see clarify some issue in this regarding? Do we have some specific question? So then, if I can use the last minutes to touch upon here on some examples of the slow innovation or the global supply chains. And so because I've been talking about supply chains and I failed to bring you a definition of the supply chains, I think this slide somehow helps to summarize what we've been talking about. When we are talking about supply chains, and is basically understanding everything that goes from the development of idea for a product, for example, research and development, branding / marketing, the design, the manufacturing. And now this often happens in the globalized context. So we have global supply chains involving the production, and we also have globalized consumption patterns. That's the common globalization definition. Then we have from the manufacturing, the distribution, the marketing, and the sales of the product, and this also takes place in the global sphere. So when we are talking about supply chains, means covering all these steps that go from the development of a product, research and development, to the final step of the distribution in the market of this product. So I talked a lot about the supply chains and the environmental standards, trying to minimize the footprint, environmental and social footprint of the corporations in their globalized supply chain. So when I talk about supply chains, I'm covering here everything that goes from the idea to the final product in the market. I advanced this and here an example of a supply chain from Apple, for example, and the supply. When we talk about the global supply chain of Apple, goes from the research and development that takes place in a number of countries, and then it involves suppliers in 31 locations worldwide. The manufacturing is located in China, but for this to unfold, for the production, for the manufacturing to occur in China, they require supplies from 31 locations. That's when we call globalized supply chains. And then the product follows another chain in terms of distribution, and final consumption, and still is a component of the return of the product. So everything from the development of the product to the final moment of consumption is what we put into this discussion on the supply chains. Here I jump a number of slides after the lecture to underline in the final minutes. I thought I had here examples of slow innovation in this regarding, but now the time is only basically 2 minutes left. Do you have questions in this regarding? Okay, so during the break, I've been sharing a number of interesting elements here, and now let's see if I can. I stop my sharing here, and I do the sharing of my Google here. Okay, I think you see. So it's one of the examples of slow innovation. It doesn't really look like slow innovation, but this ERT, and I get in contact with a person that knows this company. They rely heavily on the local knowledge on the textile sector, and they are now engaging with high-end products. They are supplying the BMW, as I mentioned before, and what are the other examples? Here they are also supplying the Opel with by combining innovation within the traditional sector of textile, and they specialize, for example, in sewing these products, and they are able to position themselves because they are of their not necessarily slow process or slow innovation, they probably won't call that, but by they do embrace the principles of slow innovation, and they are really playing a role in feeding a niche market with high quality, long lasting products, and hopefully this will expand to other domain, not only the automobile, which still is also a controversial sector in the society. The other example involves more technical textiles and technical shoes. I think, okay, I'm getting back to the screen sharing, and here is products, and here they specialize in the number of they rely heavily again on their know-how in the shoemaking process, and they're essentially producing high-tech shoes for different types of markets, and in the beginning I think they underlined this for firefighters, for example, for the army, for healthcare services, or other kind of heavy industries, for example. So, and both they are located, as I know, both of them, they are located in very small communities. People used to work mainly in the textile sector to produce this type of shirts or t-shirts, and now they engage in high-end products, long-lasting products. Again, slow innovation is around there, the principles are certainly there, and the circular economy business models, they are slowly taking shape in this kind of activities, which I see with good highs. So stop sharing here. Any question from your side? So we are advancing to our final lecture. Let me know if you have some question. We are advancing to our final lecture, mission-oriented and degrow concepts. And you know that the first deadline is also coming 1 week after. So hopefully you are already shaping your ideas in terms of topic, and let me know. And before Christmas, you will hear from me in terms of your topic. I always tend to be in favor of your topic, and I try to help you to eventually shape that topic, but still retaining your prime idea, which I think is fundamental while doing research. If we are doing research in something you don't really like or don't feel any attachment, that is very difficult. All right. So feel free to write to me anytime you want, and I will be happy to reply. And I will see you all next week for our final lecture. Okay. Thank you so much for coming or watching later.